right, so yeah, we're smaller in scale this morning, but that's probably a good thing because we can really have a chat. And we have grounding and self-care as our topic. And I think that what we've come to see is that activism could be anything. You know, it could be in our communities, with people we know, with our family and friends, with our schools. It could be really anything at all. And it could be with ourselves, which is what we're going to talk about today. What is spiritual activism with ourselves? And I love how Judy defined activism in the morning yesterday. She said, we're all in spiritual activism because we're all acting from a spiritual source every day. So that's spiritual activism. So looking at getting beyond the form and our ideas of what we should be doing. Because I know that I've often felt like I need to be doing something in particular, and then I'm surprised when that thing's not happening. 6 months later, I'm not doing it. I'm doing something else. So, and sometimes we miss the joy of doing what we're doing because we keep thinking about what we should be doing or what we think we should be doing. So those are just some starter thoughts, and we have Mahima and Sharon here with us. I think you all have met Mahima, and Sharon is someone who's been an activist. Sharon Strimling has been an activist almost all her life, practically. And it was actually right after the election that she re-immersed herself in the principles. She went up to the school at Salt Spring Island, and she found that that was really helpful because for her the election was difficult. And she saw something about the principles up at the school. And that's really helped her to re-energize after the election. And she was doing, I think, a couple of groups around spiritual activism for folks at Martha's Vineyard, where she lives, and she's a coach up there. So I invited her to come and speak about what she's seen in terms of activism in her own life and how to do that with a sense of joy and a sense of peace. Mahima has some thoughts about her activism and what she sees in people in Nepal and probably everywhere that that looks like it could lead to burnout quite quickly, or has already led to burnout. And she says she has other thoughts too. I said, that's okay. You can have other thoughts.
Thank you for permission.
Okay. As long as you pass them by me first. No. Yeah, no, so it's just going to be kind of free form. And what I'd like to do is ask you for your feedback and input this morning around, did you get what you were looking for in terms of this particular track, or even in terms of the event in general? I mean, we have 3 people who've been around the principles for quite some time, and people on the floor who have been around the principles for quite some time. So I think today's the day. It's Sunday. It's the last day. And it is just, doesn't make sense to leave with burning questions, unless sometimes those questions are the kind where you kind of know that you know the answer. So maybe you can sit with it. But if there's anything that's troubling you or bothering you, today's the day. And maybe now's the time. Yes.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, I'm so excited that Sharon's on the panel because.
I don't think it's on.
Okay.
Mic on?
It's coming on. I'm going to, well,
He said it was okay.
try it now.
Now is it on? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm so excited that Sharon is on the panel because this is a question for somebody who's been a lifelong activist. I've been in and out of being an activist, many times. I've gotten very passionate about causes. But this question came to me when I went to the March for Science in Washington. And there were so many students there with their professors, you know, really worried about the future of science and the planet, and the signs were very clever and they were very exciting. We were marching in the rain, and it was really an uplifting event. But, you know, so I'm following this on Facebook and I'm seeing it dwindling. It's like, you know, you get excited around a big thing, and then keeping that purpose, that sense of drive, and I really care, I'm going to continue to be active, alive in people, is what I was curious about. You know, I think there's a natural tendency to go, well, I went to the march, you know, so I did my thing. Yeah. So since you had a long life of experience, or whatever life of experience with this, you know, I thought maybe that'd be a good question for you to help us with.
Should I jump right in, or do you want to get more questions?
I think go ahead, go for it.
So I think that's why I'm up here today, because I'm the same. My activism was tumultuous. I would get very excited, and I did start very young. I was frightened to my core when I was way too young to watch Holocaust footage, and I was shown it when I was really little. And the message was, we can never let this happen again, and this could be your neighbor, and this could be your best friend. And it was a very frightening message. They've since changed the program. They don't let people my age, at the age that I was, watch it. But and so I started very young, and my mother was also an activist in a sense. She was very active in the community, and so I jumped in young, and I thought, I have to do everything I can, and it was actually quite fear-based. I would get really delighted and excited at these marches because my hope would come up, you know, and I would see all these people and like, look at how much solidarity there is, and then we'd have so much love, and we'd feel like we're going to have this huge impact. And then I would go home and I would not watch things change in the world, or this was just my perception, you know, things were changing. But. So I did things like everything I could do that I could get energy up for, I would do. And then things that I had hopelessness around, I wouldn't do. So like I wasn't writing letters. And I know that's one of the most effective things you could do. But I, sitting at my little desk, you know, with pen and paper or a computer, felt like this isn't going to make a difference. And what I ended up seeing was this was a state of mind game. You know, this was not how am I most useful. This was how do I ride the energies of hopefulness and hopelessness and hopefulness and hopelessness. So I didn't listen to the news most of my life, and my family was very disturbed by that because they're really into watching the news and listening to the news. And I would find that I would get paralyzed. And then when I went off to college, I was super active, but I was in classes called The Threat of Nuclear War. I mean, I told people I was majoring in depressing studies, you know? Hearing things like, even if we stop now, and college was a long time ago, even if we stop now, the chemistry, it's going to keep going and going and going. And not helpful messages. So when but I did my best, and I kept doing my best, and I realized that my best came when I didn't watch the news. I just was active in the world. I did what I could. When I had this, so I went to a school for, this is not really sidetracking, it goes to a point, but I went to school for, to be a holistic health coach. And in that school, I learned a lot about what the food industry was doing and who was on the board. And they owned the food that they wanted kids to eat. And they were setting nutritional guidelines based on their overproduction of soy. And I thought, and I know what happens to kids, and I know what happens to the kids in my family. And so I got really fired up about this. Like, I've got to tackle the food industry. they're kind of big, you know? And I'm kind of small, but I'm not really. So I was having this talk. I had made this friend. He's a psychic person I met on the street, and we've stayed in touch. Just amazing. And every time he says something, I'm like, yes, that's true. And I told him that I've been having a conversation with my mother about who's struggled with food her whole life, and I've seen the pain it's inflicted. And she struggled with, it says it's this, how can it not be this? Like, that, don't give me conspiracy theories. And I was trying to tell her what was going on, and I was bringing her mood down. She was getting upset. So I walked out and I had a conversation with this guy, and I said, you know, it seems like when I try to tell people what's happening in the world or in the food industry from this place, it's not helping people. It's not helpful. And I said, but when I talk to people, I'd just recently gotten a thank you card from somebody who came to my house and we made beautiful food together. And we had a couple days together. And she said, you've changed my life. And I said, when I talk to people about, oh my gosh, look how beautiful these vegetables are. And they grew out of the earth, and the farmers are getting a living, and let's prepare it this way, and the plate is so colorful. People were really touched, and it impacted them. So I said, I feel like there's something about my joy having an impact on people, more than my upset. I don't know what that is. And he said, you know what? Your joy is your gift to the world. And I said, thank you, Sydney, so much. I love you so much. And I opened my car door, and on the ground, right outside my car door, this big, in gold, metallic, shiny gold, was a cutout hanging thing that said joy. And it's been hanging on my car ever since. And that lesson, so that was before the elections. And as Amy said, I got freaked out during the elections. And all my Holocaust stuff came back. And the messages, why didn't people leave? This could be your neighbor. It comes upon people really fast, and they don't expect it. Nobody thinks it'll go there. This all started coming back to me. This was just my internal experience. And I started thinking, should I leave the country? I started looking into Nova Scotia for land. I said, but what about my friends and my family? I mean, I got really freaked. And at Salt Spring Island, there was a taco stand, the really good taco stand. And I was kind of scoping out for either a Canadian husband or somebody to adopt me. So I found the adopter. He said, absolutely, I'll adopt you. I said, okay, what's the process? Just want to know. This was before the election. This was just anticipating it. But I really didn't think it wouldn't go my way. I'm not going to go. I know people feel different ways about the election. But my experience, it went the way I didn't want it to go. And I was shocked. I really was shocked, and I was taken aback. And I spent the next few days in a cabin with no running water, no electricity, with a dear friend and a little baby, and I just cried and was terrified. And so I put on my headset, and I said, I'd just been at Salt Spring. I said, I got to see something different. I got to see how I can be okay no matter what, and how the world can be okay no matter what it looks like. And I listened to tapes going to sleep. I listened to tapes in the middle of the night when I woke up frightened. I listened to tapes in the morning. And that was really when I took my education. I had learned this 23 years ago or something, and it had been a part of me, but there was things, obviously there's always things we don't see. And I went deeper, and I went deeper, and I went deeper. And I came out really in the best place I've been in my life. And I think for me, the peace was I had to see that the inside-out experience is 100% of the time. And I had to see that there's never an exception, no matter how scary things look. And I had to see that new thought is always coming. The principles are my self-care. There is nothing beyond understanding the power of thought, the power of consciousness, and the power of mind that could do for me what happened. And I came into a place of so much gratefulness and back into joy. And since then, my activism has been, well, so I started a group right away, a free group, because everybody around me was terrified. And I said, please come to my house, this is free. You know, let's just be together, and I'll share what I have if it's helpful to you. And I felt like, and it ended up occurring to me that this was a year of service for me. I wasn't going to charge anything for any of this for a year. I'm not preaching that. Things started coming to me, and I just started trusting them, right? Like there's something going on that's so much bigger than what I can see. And so that's the space of my last year. And the evolution of that has pointed me back to joy over and over again. It has been such a, I cannot express my gratitude enough, like that I have been exposed to this understanding, and that when it touches me, it seems to touch other people. Now, I got a little bungled up about talking because I thought I still haven't written a letter. I still haven't done the things that look like activism, right? Like I was a little bit like, I said to Amy, I'm not the perfect activist, I'm not. And over the course of the year, I have realized, who knows the impact. Like if I'm going to trust something bigger than what somebody tells me. A letter is a great thing to do. I'm trusting something bigger. I'm trusting that when I wake up and my joy tells me to connect these two people who are going to love each other, I don't know what that's going to start. So I feel like it's sort of like in the way that you said, it's broadened my understanding of activism. And I know the topic is self-care, but it feels like it comes hand in hand. Like when I am looking in this direction, there's nothing more I need. And my wisdom will tell me, like you said, it's just telling me right now, I'm just not the letter writer, but I might be the person who helps the letter writers stay resilient. I might be the person. And I reached out to another group of activists to say, can I share something that might help you guys stay resilient? And it kind of reminds me of tribes, there are people who fill different roles and I feel like I'm born to do certain things, and I didn't know that before. But now I feel like I'm born to do those things, and when I stay with those things, amazing things happen. And over the past few months, unbelievable things happen that could have global impact. I connected out of joy with somebody who has a global vision, who has now brought me in to participate, to share with him, and he's looking at having global impact because he's started a crazy huge business for the environment. And then I had another idea a couple days ago that has to do with crazy dance parties for change, because I'm a dancer and there's nowhere I'm happier than on the dance floor. And I think I would have poo-pooed that a couple years ago. And now it's like, oh, no, I'm not poo-pooing that. This could be powerful. Sure. So, so I guess it's been an evolution that I owe the hugest debt of gratitude to Sydney Banks and all the teachers, because I do feel like this brings life where there's discouragement. This brings hope where there's hopelessness. And we're not making it up. It's just the way life is. It's just the fact of life. So I'm sitting in a world that is magical beyond my imagination, even in the context of watching these things happen that are so painful. So anyway, I think maybe I have a couple of stories if they come back that I think are kind of cool, but I think I'll pass the baton.
Thank you. It's really beautiful.
No, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions or about grounding and self-care or anything at all, or comments? If not, I think I'd like to ask Mahima to speak a little bit about her thoughts, pre-screened and otherwise.
So I'm a late realizer of the fact that I've been an activist. It just was not a term I ever associated with, resonated with. But that instinct of seeing something that has potential to be better and being one of those people that goes there and wants to make things better in whatever industry, whatever businesses I've been a part of. I just had never thought of that as activism. I had just thought of that as like human, like people do that, you know, when people see something better, they want to go there. And to a large extent, I still see activism in that way, in that it doesn't, to me, feel like a separate category of behavior, which in a way relates to what you said, which is, to me, activism is not necessarily related to letter writing or marches, and all marchers and letter writers are not necessarily activists. To me, activism is a spirit of making active choices about the world, I think. And sometimes that looks like a march or a letter or starting a group and a broader conversation. And sometimes it's a way of recognizing, as it has been for me many times, that, oh, I'm a contributor to this problem I see here. That somehow I too am fixed in my perceptions. And that if I am to bring, or if I want a world that has more peace and more creativity and more wisdom in it, I can't do that if I'm not going to allow myself to experience those things, right? So sometimes activism has been more kind of, when I see things, they're a mirror to see, oh, I'm co-creator of this thing over here, right? That I call society. I mean, like Nepal, Srijana, we had a couple of conversations on things that are going on there. And for a long time, it was like, oh, I'm just not going to look there. I'm going to stay in the domain of business where, A, I have a lot of interest and I'm already there. And B, I can make a real dent. I mean, I can see that there are certain levers that I can pull that can make a difference to large numbers of people in relatively short periods of time. But if you look at social change in Nepal as a whole, or politics, like God knows how long that would be. Right? And anything is a drop in the ocean, a drop in the ocean, a drop in a bigger ocean. It just didn't seem like it was going to go anywhere. And for a long time, I just didn't go there. Now, this, to me, is something that I was saying to Anita in the previous track, that I was afraid that I would feel bad. You know, if I got into something and there was no difference, that somehow I would feel bad. And I didn't want to feel bad. I didn't want to get involved in something that I didn't think would give me results, right? And at some point, this was actually with the child trafficking program, that on one hand, there have been phenomenal strides made, right? And on the other, there's always going to be people who are going to do crazy things. There's going to be new people born who are going to do crazy things. There are going to be, I mean, there is no way to control the whole world like that so that nobody does anything crazy to anybody else, right? But I realized I had this invisible layer of thinking in my head, which was like, I keep plugging along thinking, oh, someday it'll change and it'll stop. And at some point I realized, actually, I don't need that. I don't need to fake convince myself that it's all gonna be perfect one day to keep going. That I, for a long time, thought, oh, that's what keeps me going, right? That's what keeps me hopeful. But actually, it's really not. It was just a lot of work to keep convincing myself that stuff is gonna change. And I realized that there are some things I care about that I'm gonna participate in. Regardless of whether it makes a dent in my lifetime, not in my lifetime, in the next year, there are just some things I care about, and I'm going to choose to participate in them, right? And I kind of go back and forth between thinking more of the formless nature of things and that there is a bigger picture that I really don't know about, and thinking, well, but I'm here, you know? So, I mean, and I see stuff, I'm going to do something about some of them. And I realize how much engagement is no different from what has happened for me with the principles in my own life, which is stuff that I was blind to before becomes more visible, right? I had, in a way, banned myself from caring too much about the state of politics in Nepal, thinking, oh, I can't go there. Right? So I kind of put it off limits, even though I really, really do care. Right? And it was a long time before I was unafraid of what that means, that I see something and I'm going to choose to go there. And self-care for me has meant mostly what you said, which is just bringing kind of myself back to the principles, right? Because sometimes I realize as activists, we take sides, right? There are people on the other side of the table and there's us. And we can forget the humanity in that. And we can kind of try to bring peace and resolution in a really aggressive way, right? Which just kills me. I mean, it's ridiculous, but we do it, right? It's so easy to get blinded by the rightness of my point of view that I just think, well, they don't, I mean, they would all be better off. Right? And it might be true, but I might be better off if I change my mind. But I can't see it because I've pre-decided that there's a dividing line here between us. And so for me, a lot of times it has been very humbling, actually, to realize that people are equal, like really, really equal. Even though I can have this idea in my head that some opinions are more accurate, more scientific, more intelligent, more whatever, but I'm making that all up. There is an equality between us that I refuse to acknowledge when I put some people on that side of the table. And I think my job is to make things better for everybody by changing these guys, right? So for me, activism has been a very humbling experience of initially thinking, oh, I could help, and realizing, oh man, I need help. Like, this is ridiculous. It's appalling how much I'm blind to the humanity in people. And it seems like every week I'm struck by it, but I've not quite learned that properly yet, because it still happens to me that I see people and I get instinctively kind of adversarial, right? And just like me with the earthquake, the ground shaking, versus all the stuff in my head, I do that with issues I care about, right? There are facts out there that I want to change, but I'm not fighting with them because they don't agree with the facts, right? They've made up some stuff about the facts, I've made up some stuff about the facts, and we're desperately fighting without realizing that we cannot bring peace into the world without experiencing it and without demonstrating it. And the irony of that had genuinely never struck me until maybe the last year and a half or two, realizing that really, if you allow yourself to experience more peace and are more able to listen to yourself and to your own wisdom, you encourage that in the people around you. And it doesn't matter in this world, in this space and time, which side of the line they've picked. Right? It affects people. It helps people show up with more of their whole selves. And that's really the job, no? I mean, if I care about an issue, I don't care that I'm right. I care that it turns out better. And who cares if the solution is mine or theirs? I want an intelligent solution. And it doesn't come from me always, or mostly, right? But this awareness that not losing sight of the humanity in people has been exceptionally, to me, just life-changing for both sides of arguments, to realize that people are people, the solution can come from anywhere. And it doesn't always come from my side of the table. It can come literally from anywhere. And I've seen that happen over and over again over the last 2 or 3 years, that people that I never expected would care about something. If I'm willing to go to that place where I'm no longer trying to just be impressive and just convince them, and if I'm just more open with them, they're able to bring to the surface things they would never have said in public, because we are in opposition. We're not supposed to agree with things. But the number of times people have just said, okay, you know what? I'm going to change sides here because I see this differently. That has happened on both sides. There are times that I've realized that, I mean, this is with the children, it has been specifically transformative because it's such a heated issue, you know. It's like, well, there's clearly right and wrong here.
Which issue?
And there's with the child trafficking.
Child trafficking.
Right? And we're so opinionated about that. And we get blinded by the intensity of that. And we become unable to see that there's the same principles at play for all people involved in this. For all people. All people have potential for change. All people have potential to see more helpful ways of being in the world. And we all have the capacity to change our mind about stuff, right? So when we're arguing about what's the best way to combat it or prevent it or rehabilitate, we forget that we all really, really care about the kids. And we completely forget that. We get involved in the technicalities of it and we start to argue it, but we forget that the humanity of each other, of people that we call perpetrators or enablers. And in forgetting their humanity, we become unable to see what's helpful. Because I no longer see that guy as a person. I've just somehow decided he's less than a person, right? And that somehow he's exceptionally bad. Like, I'm fooled by my thinking, but no, I don't have that kind of thinking that I'm fooled by, you know? But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say there's, has anyone heard the story of David Duke's godson? David Duke's godson went to kind of a liberal college, actually. I think Jen knows. Do you remember the name?
New college in Florida.
What college?
New college.
New college in Florida. And he came from a white supremacist background, obviously. And when he got on campus, people were up in arms already about him. And this was kind of eye-opening to me. He was surprised. He didn't understand why people were afraid of him or upset about him. And rather than shun him, though, people invited him to conversations and meetings and talks with them. And so he engaged with them. And for him, he said, you know, I just didn't realize. I thought I was protecting and defending the people I loved. That's how I saw it. And he was also grateful to the people who reached out to him. You know, he said, if it weren't for those people, if they had just ignored me or shunned me, I would not have had those conversations with them. So he came out of white supremacy, and he's written op-eds for the Washington Post and so on and so forth. So I'm just sort of speaking to seeing the humanity and the capacity for someone to change or to even engage in some kind of a dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, for me, activism has been self-growth mostly.
Let's take a question. I just want to make sure we have time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say my heart's so full for each of you in different capacities, so thank you for this morning. I've spoken with Amy in the past. My name's Colin. I'm more recently introduced to the principles this year, having gone to a recovery program. My life was in shambles before the principles, and it's changed my life. So, as you were speaking to earlier, that joy I found when I had 9 weeks to myself in silence and retreat. When I was away, one of the things and why I'm part of this sector with the spiritual activism is I'm also part of the LGBTQ community. And when I was away, I noticed that so much of what my pain was and all of that sorrow really came from a very fearful childhood onward, where I just turned off from the world and I went inward with really, really negative thoughts. And as I came here today and I see up there, self-care and I see grounding, those two things have been the most helpful for the last 6 months. And I know when I first came out, Amy knows this, I reached out to her like right away when I got out, and I was like, I gotta share this with everyone. Everyone's gotta know. This will help my brothers and sisters, like who are really, really struggling. So, and everyone takes activism, like you said, in different ways. But what's great about the reminder this morning is that we're already living it by our example. So I guess my question would be, if I'm looking to get involved, but I don't want to become the preacher of to people and freak them out about a quote-unquote cult. What would you guys recommend as far as how you guys reach back out? I know you spoke to earlier that you sometimes reach out to activists that are already working. How do you spread the message?
I wasn't sure. I have to say it's been a gradual process where I made lots of mistakes. But there's a really good feedback system in place. So I'd start talking to somebody and be like, oh, I gotta tell you what I'm seeing, right? And then their face either looks interested or they look like, please don't. Like there's not, and I used to sometimes push through it, like, no, when you hear this, you'll really, And now here's how I feel now. I feel like the world is there are so many people in the world who are just ready to eat this up. And they're gonna be drawn to me. I'm gonna say something like, well, I learned something that was really helpful to me. Would you like to hear it? And they're gonna be like, yeah, And then I'm of service. And it's not that there aren't times where I'm like, I kind of have an agenda where I really want to help someone, but I notice that in myself because I get to thinking that, first of all, I have something they don't have, and secondly, that I have any right to butt into their psychological process. But there are so many times when I have this overwhelming feeling to be helpful. And especially if I see somebody really suffering. Somehow, I'm going to turn it over again to mind. Somehow, over time, the more I look at mind, thought, and consciousness, the more I just deepen my own understanding. The more I just stay with, like, what do I know and what don't I know and what can I see? And the more I have this feeling that there's a magical quality to life, the more that comforts me and takes away the urgency, and people sense that. And, when I get it wrong, I just go, oh, sorry, I got a little, like I'm going to get it wrong, right? And I had another thought, but I forgot it. But is that helpful? Okay.
Would you mind if I added something real quick?
That would be great.
Sure, and then
And I'll keep
Pam's
it
got her
very quick.
hand up
Yeah,
too.
I'll hand it over. So my grandson is a part of the LGBTQ community, and he's 18.
Could you say that again into the
Yes,
mic?
I'm saying, my grandson is part of the LGBTQ community, and he's 18. And he went to the March for Women with his friends from school because he was supporting the community of girls that they all hang out with. And he met a street performer who changed his thinking about being in that community. And the street performer is just an over-the-top person who mostly is in Times Square, but went to the march to cheer people up because he didn't want it to be a depressing march. And so he's like, you know, of course there were millions of people and only a few people saw him, but he's just a wild and wacky guy. You know, he dresses in crazy costumes and does wild things and laughs and tells jokes and sings, and he's just a great person. And my grandson talked to this guy for quite a while. And the guy said, you know what, you got to join the community of happy people. You know, just be happy, and you know, it's no point being an activist for a very small segment of humanity that's just a person, you know, and it really changed his thinking, you know, because when he came back from that, then a bunch of his friends wanted to go glamping, which is gay camping, and he said, no, I'm going camping with everybody. I don't want to go to some special, you know, camp thing, like it's like sending your kid to fat camp or something, you know? And he said, no, I just want to go, you know, I want to be just a regular guy or a regular person, and I don't care. And it was such a freeing thing for him. So, and it speaks to your joy. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because I think, you know, he's one of the few really, truly joyful, free spirits I know. So.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add to the joy. Somebody told me one time a saying I really love, says, some things are too serious to fight with anything but joy.
That's nice.
I think Pam had her hand up.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I find when I feel like I need to teach something, I'm not in the right place.
Yeah.
And when I talk about what is true, then the teaching happens.
Lindsay.
I'll just share a quick personal story from my life that I think is kind of relevant too. A couple years ago, right after one of these conferences, and I know it wasn't because of the conference, but I think I was in a quieter place after the weekend. I went home and got dumped, and by a guy I was seeing. And it was the easiest and most peaceful breakup I've ever had. And my friends were completely thrown off by the whole thing. Because they're like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm pretty good. Are you sure? Because you're really like, and so I think, you know, you can be, it's okay to be upset. Like they thought I was trying to hide it. I said, they're like, you deserve, that was not right, what happened. And you have a right, I think is what they said. Like, you have a right to be upset. I said, well, I know, I don't want to. And and even during the actual breakup itself, because it was kind of shocking, I had just been at this conference seeing a bunch of old friends telling me about how much I like this guy and it was really going somewhere, and then 3 days later it was not. And but even during the actual conversation, I just saw him, he was so caught up in his thinking about things. And he just wasn't that into me, which is okay, but his whole explanation was so busy. And I saw him with compassion, and even in the moment I was like, he left and I was like, well, I'm sad, but also, gosh, he just really doesn't understand that he just made this whole thing up in his head. And it's not me, obviously. No, but it really wasn't me, I knew that, never, and so I think my friends were really curious about where did you go last weekend and how are you so okay with this? So sometimes I think it just comes out in your own, it always comes out in the way you live your life and how they see that, but I think things like that will come up where they'll be like, wait, what happened to you, And when I first learned about this a bunch of years ago, I had just come out of college and I was a big activist, and I was full of anger and lots of things. And I remember I got into graduate school to get a master's degree in more anger. But in the meantime, I had gone to a couple of conferences. My dear friend had said, you should come to this training for work, not for personal. I was like, oh, as long as it's for the kids, that's fine. And of course, I got a lot. But I sent an email telling my friends from college that I had gotten into grad school. And in the email, I just said, I'm so grateful. It was just an email saying, hey, I got into this, I have a couple of options. I'm so grateful to have so many choices of where I want to go. I think I just used the word grateful. And they wrote back a couple of them got together and wrote back this response like, missing person alert. Like, where is our friend Lindsay? We don't like, why is she using words like grateful? And I remember thinking, oh my God, who was I? Like, how cynical was I that like I would not even use the word grateful in an email? And so I just think little things come up where people are like, you're different in a happier or better way or whatever. So I wouldn't worry so much about how to teach it and just be it, and then they will get curious. So.
Anyone else?
Yeah, there's someone up here.
It's been wonderful listening to you ladies and really everybody out here with all your stories. And I think it really, for me, what Gandhi said is probably the key thing is be the change you wish to see in the world. And when we be the change, the opportunities will confront us. And the world will change. Because it's inside out.
There's something about that spiritual position that is almost impossible to resist. You know, there may be resistance, there may be anger, but I think if you are coming from that spiritual position, if you even want to call it a position, you know, that's love, that's a force to be reckoned with. And that's why Martin Luther King and Gandhi had the impacts that they did, and so many other people too. I was at Jen's house this morning having my tea. I get up early and do some reading every morning with a cup of tea, and there was a book on your coffee table about 10 of the most amazing people in the world, and it was Desmond Tutu and Martin Luther King Jr. and Mother Teresa, and you know, so somehow they found joy and calling in what they were doing, and it wasn't always pretty. Obviously, you know, I mean, Gandhi was killed in the end, and people were beaten, you know, in his movement, and it was. So I think that activism, it's something that calls us. It's not something we have to go find. It calls us, and it may look actually quite frightening for some people, and yet if it keeps calling, that's what they're going to be doing. So for me, when the election happened, and again, I know there are people of different political persuasions, perhaps in this room, and I'm happy to have a dialogue with anybody, as you know. I hope I've made that clear. I was an activist in college. I actually toured the country with a book, and it was lots of demonstrations, anti-apartheid and Central Intelligence Agency recruiting, everything. I was very active in college, very active. And I had a lot of joy around it too. And then when I got into journalism, I started to see that when people take positions, they stop listening. Because I'd be interviewing both sides of an issue. And then I'd say, you know, I think there's an answer somewhere here, and there's some alignment here. And what I remember most clearly is there was this issue of, and this may bring up thinking for people, so I apologize, because we might all have some thoughts about this particular issue, but we have mountain lions in California. And you're not allowed to shoot at mountain lions. But as a result, they've become less afraid of human beings, and so they come down, and then when they come into the neighborhoods, then they get shot. And I thought, you know, I wonder if a little bit of hunting might not be good, because then they'd be afraid of humans and stay out of those environments. Now that's leaving aside the whole issue of our development and so on, but just this one slice of the issue. And I interviewed a hunter for this story, and so he had hunted mountain lions, and he had one stuffed in his house. He had all these animals stuffed in his house. And I found that, you know, I had a lot of respect for this guy, because he was a meat eater, but he also, it's what I call looking your food in the eye, you know, like he was able to kill his own animals, and he had to face that. And so I thought, well, I think there's something to that, you know. But the animal rights activists were like, there'll be no shooting. And if the mountain lion was encroaching on human territory, I mean, you could argue the opposite. But if they came into human territory and they were eating dogs and cats or attacking or frightening people because small children might be in their backyards or whatever, you know, I just saw that they're going to get killed, you know, because that's what happens when we feel frightened, and so the rangers would go out and shoot. So I could kind of see there was a middle ground there, but because both sides were saying this is how it is, this is how we should hunt all of them or we should hunt none of them. So that was just one way I started to see, oh, we really get entrenched and then we cannot come up with a solution. Now, I don't know if that would be the solution for that issue. I just started to see how people take sides. And then I wondered also, well, did Martin Luther King take a side? Was it, certainly there was sort of his forces and then opposition forces too. But there's something about standing in our common humanity. That's what he was doing. And I don't think there are any rules about what activism is. You know, I remember thinking, well, as I was looking into, my journalism background kicked in and I was doing a lot of research on the new president and trying to figure out how I felt about it and posting whatever I could find. And I thought, this is not three principles, is it? This is something else. But it made sense to me. It was what occurred to me to do. And then I helped to organize several marches as well. And I noticed the difference in when people were angry and when people were coming from a space of love. What a difference. You know, there was one march actually Allie was at with me where we were hoping to be nonviolent, but we didn't have enough time to prepare. And so a bunch of students came down from the university. They were very angry. And they had actually been honked at and hassled on the way down. But I think they were marching in the streets without a permit. So cars were backed up. And I thought, that's not a good idea, because when you're marching, you're trying to communicate. You're just trying to communicate. Now, do you want to communicate to people who already agree with you? You know, you have to think about, what am I trying to communicate? Who am I trying to reach? And how can I best reach them? I think that's the piece that can be missed when there's a lot of anger. And it's understandable fear and anger, because the students were mostly Latino and they were very afraid of what was going to happen to them and their families. Very afraid and very angry. So they ended up blocking an intersection in Santa Cruz, which we had not planned to do. And they were very sort of angry about it. And then this truck came down, just like here in Charlottesville, and almost ran them over, stopped short, and then would just rev. There were like 30, 40 people. The students would not move, and this truck was revving and revving, and sometimes there'd be smoke, and he'd pull up a little bit, and everyone would freak out. And I went to talk to the police, and they were not really interested in helping out. Finally, they came. But it seems to me that anger just generates more fear, which generates more anger. And I think communication gets lost at that point. Allie, do you remember that? Yeah, she was there. Yeah.
So I want to go back to that. What you were saying is so important. And I didn't go to the big women's march in Washington. I chose to science instead, but I went to the women's march in Sarasota, Florida, where, you know, where I live, and of course it's mostly older people, so all these sort of recycled activists from the 70s. You know, we're all old now, but we march anyway. But we have a sense of humor now. And what's funny is, you know, after you've seen life for a while, you just find the humor in everything. Right. And so the signs were hilarious. You know, they were not ugly, mean signs, but, you know, I remember the first one I saw was this woman that I actually know, who hand wrote her own sign, and it says, "Uh-oh, now you've gone and pissed off Grandma." You know, but all of us had signs that were very positive and very lighthearted. And I asked one of the people that I knew that, you know, I knew she'd been a real big activist in her youth, like me too, and I said, you know, would you have carried a sign like this, you know, back then? She said, hell no, I was mad then. And she said, but now, you know, what's the point of being mad? We don't have that much time left. Let's just try to uplift people.
Oh.
Yeah.
Somebody in the back.
I don't have
Good morning. As for the definition of activist, like Mahima said, we come from a culture which is very, very protected, especially for girls. So I did not even know what an activist meant until I went to college, to be more specific, when I was studying for my master's degree at the Tribhuvan University, which was the only university in Nepal at that time. So that was in the 90s when the king had just handed over his complete power to the political parties, so there was a lot of turmoil going on. And there were like basically two major political parties which were constantly at having a tussle between them. And the university was a place where they had all their young cadres posted, because the university had hostels and cheap food, so the university hostel was more of a place where they would keep their political cadres than students, actual students. So every morning we used to go to class, and then a bunch of boys would just march into our classrooms and go up to the professor and say, "Sir, there's not going to be any classes today because we have this agenda to fulfill. So until this agenda is fulfilled, no one's taking classes, or you're not allowed to teach." So this happened constantly for many days, and reaching the university was also, it was at a place which was out of the city, so we had to take the public bus, which was not a very good experience. It was crowdy, smelly, messy. So day by day that went on, no one would speak up. So one day, I just finally decided to put my foot down. So the bunch of boys came along, as usual. They started to threaten us and the professor. And then everyone started to leave the class. And then I don't know what got into me that moment. I just stood up and said, "I'm not leaving. I have come here to study." And I pointed to the professor and said, "Sir, you better stay there, because your job is to teach us, not to obey this bunch of hooligans." There was shocked silence. Despite of that, most of the students left, and only 6 of us were left in the classroom. So we made it a point to take all classes that day. Usually we would bunk a class or two towards the end of the day because we wanted to get back home early. But that day we made it a point to stay for all classes. So by 5 o'clock, classes were over, and we used to take the bus. So my girlfriends and I were walking towards the bus, and there was a group of 40 men waiting for us. So they kind of surrounded us, and they had pinpointed me as the leader. And one of them said, "You have to apologize, make a public apology to our friend for humiliating him." I said, "Excuse me, I don't know what I've said to humiliate him. I just said what I see right." And then one of the boys said, "Oh, she's the new activist, feminist." Till then, I didn't know I was an activist. So I said, "Okay, I'll go home and look that word up in the dictionary." But for now, I'm just doing what I feel is right. And then they started threatening my friends and me by saying, "Until you apologize, we're not letting you go home." And then when you're young, you have this kind of brash courage. So I was also like quite headstrong. So I said, "Fine, you're not going to let me go home. I'm going to sit here. But just wait and watch who all come to get me." I didn't have any political backing or anything, but just to like kind of fight them, I had to say, "Okay, I'm going to sit here, but just wait and watch who's there behind me." And then they kind of got startled and said, "Maybe this girl has connections, that's why she's so bold." In fact, I didn't. I was just speaking because I felt I had to speak up. So then one of the guys said, "Oh, let her go. She's like too much of an activist, so let her go home." So that's when I started thinking, okay, what is an activist actually? I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. I just spoken up for my right. And then my girlfriends started saying, "Let's not go to college tomorrow because I'm sure the guys will be there waiting for us to create more trouble." I said, "No, we have to go because I don't want to let them win. We are right." So we went, and by the time we went, the whole college was abuzz with the news, what we had done. So we had kind of become the news. But that was just the beginning of a series of harassment that they used to like try to taunt us with. Like when we went to the canteen, they would like literally, try to push themselves against us, so things like that. I went through that. but I kind of fought back. At one time, there was a time when I had a cup of hot tea, which I just got, and there was a guy who was trying to corner me, and I just literally poured the tea down his neck. And later on, I realized that that guy had become one of the ministers a few years back. So I bet he remembers my tea, though he's the minister. So just, this might not exactly be what we're talking about, but I just wanted to share that that was the point when I felt that, okay, if activism means this, then I am ready to be branded an activist. Thank you. There are many stories, but we'll continue.
You know, I think it's really helpful to me, the way Amy started this, to say activism can look like anything. And, you know, when I talk about, like, what I do coming from joy, well, it's picture understanding that life is so much bigger. Like those moments where we know life is so much bigger, right? To me, I'm almost calling that joy. I'm not saying I'm running around happy and smiling everything I do. And there are moments where I stand firm and I go, hey, right? It's a background. And your story reminds me so much of one where I was at a speak out and they started dismantling the speakers. I said, that's okay, I don't need those. I can talk really loud. And I got to the front, and so, and there have been so many moments, you know, in my experience where I have gotten angry, discouraged, whatever, you know. There was a huge wind power farm proposed near my home. And there was an opposition group that thought they wouldn't look pretty and then thought they'd kill birds and then thought they'd kill fishing. And anyway, I did some public speaking for that. And in the end, the community squashed the project and I got very discouraged. This was before the election. But anyways, a YouTube video came around, and this is where I just go, universe, oh my gosh. A YouTube video came around, and this is going to sound weird, but it was about the life of the sun. And I had been saying, look, you guys, there's species on the planet that are going extinct every day. That's wrong. They're going extinct every day, and you don't like this wind power project because you don't like the way it's going to look, or it's not perfect. It's not. Right? But we don't have perfect yet. And I don't know who said perfection's the enemy of the good, but I really believe that. Like, we do the next right step, because right now kids are dying of asthma in the coal burning places and species are going extinct, and I thought it was a really good speech, but I lost. So this video comes around and it's about the life of the sun. And it was very interesting, but the end point was the sun's going to go out. Eventually the sun's going to go out. And boy, did I see something with that. We're all going to go extinct. It's just a matter of when. And it broadened, like I can feel it now, it broadened, it expanded my, I don't know what this is all about. Now, it didn't in any way diminish my calling, and this, we were talking about this the other day with beliefs, like, I think I was born on this planet just with a, I love nature, and, you know, I don't know that, it didn't make that go away. It didn't make it go away that as a human on this planet, I'm going to do everything I can to help species on this earth. It didn't diminish that in any way, but it took away a whole lot of thinking about the tragedy and the trauma and the wrongness. And in that moment, I saw that somebody else could grow up on this planet knowing that the sun's going to go out, knowing we're all here for a little bit of time, and how tall can we build the tallest building? Like, that could be their thing. You know, it's not mine. You know? Or that we're here for some purpose, whatever story they have. You know, I had a story that we got to keep the species all going and respect nature. So, I don't know, I guess I just felt like pointing to the joy, just clarifying, like, I am really pretty happy a lot, but, you know, I don't have to be happy to be an activist. I'll be all kinds of moods. I'll lead a normal life, you know? But because of the principles and because of my understanding that I'm seeing my thinking, and there's always new thinking, and there is something, and it's looking really real to me, but there's something bigger that's continually bringing new thought, and there's so much I can't see. That's how I'm going to define joy at the moment. Yeah. That's what, and then I keep listening. Like, then I just keep listening. Next right step, next thing to say, next thing not to say. Like not.
I just wanted to follow up on my story too. I actually was involved in 4 different marches in a very short period of time and organized with one other woman a tax march in Palo Alto to ask for the Trump tax returns on tax day. And we had our congresswoman there. We had about 200 people there. I was speaking. We had other speakers there. I can't even believe I did all of this now.
That's amazing.
How did that happen? Yeah. And I remember after that march, I was done.
Yeah.
It was like I really had no interest in doing anything else for a long time. You know, it felt like it was time to tend to my personal life and things going on in my family, and so I've been totally okay with that. In fact, does anyone get a lot of emails these days? Yes. Like from every organization under the sun? Yeah. So I used to feel bad deleting them. Like I should read that and maybe sign that petition. And I'm just delete, and even spam.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that with the sense of all I know is I'm going to the awesome event. I'm going to do the spiritual activism track. I've been asked to do that. Thank you so much, Jen and Jean Catherine, for that. And that's all I know. I don't know and I have a sense that there'll be something else, but I'm waiting. And in the meantime, it's been a period for me of going within. And that's happened actually every few years. There'll be a moment of, or a period of even putting out the principles. No, let that go.
Yeah.
Because if that's how you're defining yourself, if that's how you're defining your well-being, you're in trouble again because you're outside in again. With even something as beautiful as the principles or whatever it is.
So important, and I'm thankful that you said that, because so much of the time the prompt is stop, rest. I love the cup floweth over. Like you give what's in the saucer, you don't give the cup.
Oh, that's good. I just got that. I was like, saucer.
Wait, what one? Oh, yeah, it's another one. Oh, please. I didn't invent it. I wish I could take credit.
Amy's informed this morning.
We had a late night last night.
We
with
did.
The s'mores.
Do you want me to put the... Are we ready? No. We were playing that WhatsApp game with the charades for hours. I was just thinking that, you know, for me, well, I think for everyone, but for me, like because I had this whole activist history, I mean, I still am, but it looks so different today, because I think what understanding the principles has done for me is, like you just sort of spoke to, just like when I'm really quiet, like I'm directed, like I'm pulled to do toward the things I want to do, and those things aren't the things that I would have done 15 years ago. So even like the Women's March, you know, I didn't go, and I had a lot of thinking about it, because I had another commitment that was moving me toward like another direction in my life. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be there, or but I had this whole internal conflict, and I finally just realized no one cares if I'm there. Like they're not taking roll, it's not, I'm not less of a, I had this whole thinking about it, but I knew what I had already committed to was the right step. And I think the news piece is another one. Like just, I had a lot of thinking about people that weren't informed, and now I'm like, I will look at the news occasionally, just enough to sort of know what I need to know, whatever that means. But I think that like just being able to use, wisdom to guide what makes sense, instead of feeling like reactive to everything all the time, because it's like overwhelming now. There's just too much that we can react to, So just being able to, like, I think for me, just realizing that activism looks different now than it did before. And that's okay.
We have this idea, that like some things count as action and some things don't. Like if you care about something, this is the checklist of stuff you must do to look like you care about it. Right? And then, but then if you talk to people, right? I talk to I'm generally curious about people. So I'm often asking them about stuff about their life that had impact, what moved them, what were turning points. It's very rare that I meet somebody and they have this epic turning point that is a real historical moment. Usually they're like, I don't know, I was at the checkout line, I talked to this guy at the back. It's like, so who knows what our role is in things? I feel like whatever phase we're in, if we're listening, we have a really good shot at being in places that have impact. And it's not always what I intellectually think of counts as impact, right? But that somehow the presence and just presence, looking and seeing, inside as well as outside. There's solutions that we don't think of, like that our ego doesn't think of, count as solutions, right? But we're not really the best judge of that, I don't think. Because I speak to people that I've mentored, or kids that, like, people have come up to me that I knew in school that, we talked like for 2 minutes. And there were people with whom we have done like 3 days. It's like completely disproportionate on what the impact is. It's like, that day I was really bummed out and you just said like 4 words or something. Mm-hmm. And it's not like I intended for those 4 words to be the profoundest words he'd ever heard. No, there's something that clicks for people when they're ready to hear things. It's not related to me at all, and whatever I think is relevant action.
And we don't know everything either, so that's why I think.
Speak for yourself.
Especially these guys, they don't know much. But like when there's this global warming issue, and we're, some of us are concerned, some of us are not, some of us think it's a hoax, and so whatever, right? So some of us are concerned, I am. And yet also I saw an article about the planet growing more vegetation in response. And I thought, wow, that's cool. Maybe the planet is resilient and it'll take care of itself. But on the other hand, I'm like, but let's not wait and see. Right? Let's find out what's going on. They're just surprising things. Or like the problem with the plastics in the ocean. So much plastic in the ocean. There's that plastic. It's almost like a mini ocean of plastic out in the ocean. And it's getting into the birds and everything. And then I just heard about this kid who developed this really ingenious idea. He's like 16 or 17 years old. And he's like, I got a plan. And it's working. So we just don't know. Or the hole in the ozone that was happening before when we had the hydrochlorofluorocarbons.
Well done. Could not have done that.
I was just hearing in the news that hole is closing up again.
Using hairspray.
Yeah, because we banned the hydrochlorofluorocarbons, and so so that's at least hope that if we are to to do something on our side with global warming that could be fixed. We don't know how quickly. People are guessing, right?
Yeah.
And they're scientists and they have a lot of good data, but we honestly don't know. So that's why, to me, it's following wisdom is about finding our place in the bigger picture. We don't know what that will lead to, but we do know that it feels right.
Yeah.
For now, it feels right. For me to have organized the marches helps me to speak to activists who are marching, and I didn't know that's what that would lead to, or taking a big break has helped me to go back to, the silence and the bigger picture, just being in the unknown again.
Yeah.
And that's important. Sometimes it's the most important thing. Or sometimes what's most important is to just go dancing.
Something has occurred to me as I've listened to everybody speak. I've noticed the last few years that when I have larger insights, I almost always laugh. I find that humor accompanies my insight, and I think that it's because I'm able to see incongruities, and they're unexpected, so there's surprises. There's always that, having worked in the theater for years, there's always laughter that can be a little bit prompted by productive or positive discomfort that somebody may experience. But when I have insights, I find that I'm laughing sometimes. And it reminded me that there was a French philosopher, Henri Bergson, developed a theory of comedy in which he said that we laugh at ourselves and others when we, as living, dynamic human beings, notice that we've started to act like machines. Inanimate, inhuman, mechanical, repeating the same behavior over and over again. And when we become aware of that, we go, oh, oh, how silly I am not to have seen that I have become so rigid and inflexible. And so I don't know if that pertains to anything that's been spoken this morning, but that's been on my mind a little bit, because I actually enjoy the fact that there's a playfulness that accompanies insights. And I just love that about it.
I just have to say this. I want to speak out a little bit on not ignoring the news completely, because one of the issues that I have with the way things go in the world is voters are uninformed. And but I actually do a group for women that I work with called Reading the News in Neutral.
Beautiful.
And I think that speaks to what you were talking about. Your journey was to see the neutrality that, there's stuff I haven't even thought of yet that they're probably thinking about. But to just be able to sort out the different speech, I don't encourage people to read the comments, for example, because they're not the news, and they're very agitating. But, you can read about what's happening and stay informed. Like, it's important to know that environmental protections have been reversed. There are things that it's good to know, but you don't need to get excited about it.
Right.
It's possible to just know that and tuck that away. And when you go to a political event during election season, you can ask the person who's the candidate, how do you feel about what's happened with this or that, and see what you want to do. But the lack of people that are so terrified of finding out what's happening for fear that they'll be upset about it, in a sense, they go to the voting booth like, anyway, sorry, but that to me is part of activism, is helping people not to hurt themselves
Yes.
reading the news, but not to just check out.
Yes, once you have the principles or an idea of, or whatever, but an idea that can bring you neutrality, that was part of the group. Actually, I love the name of your group. But, and I also found there were other ways I could get the news, like from people close to me who would deliver it in a way that wasn't inundating. But being aware, you're just pointing to different ways of staying in touch and aware, and I do agree. It's important.
I really, pardon?
How are we doing for time?
We have a little bit of time, 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
I really wish the news, because news is such a big word, there's so much going on. And if the news could focus on also, this kid who came up with the solution for the plastics problem, or one solution, or was it in the New York Times? Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But it does feel like there's more of the negative.
Yeah.
And so that, I believe, is a result of our level of consciousness. I heard there was a news organization in Israel that decided to focus on the positive. And so they were just trying to put out positive stories, and their ratings went way, way, way down. Because people want that excitement or the sensationalism or the fear. They're a little bit addicted to the drama. And that's us. So if all we're doing is sharing a spiritual understanding, the 3 principles, to me that's huge. Because that's what people are missing. That they feel the need to keep their minds busy with this negativity, or they want. That's really the problem, isn't it? We want more. I need more. And never finding any satisfaction in that or fulfillment, never stopping.
There was I don't know if it's still in print, but there was a magazine from the Netherlands called Ode, and the tagline was the magazine for intelligent optimists, and it talked about world events, and it talked about solutions. It was really lovely. Yeah. I saved all the old ones, but I haven't gotten a new one. So Ode.
I just wanted to share that it's interesting. Spiritual activism, on some level, seems like a oxymoron. Because before I came from activism, I was like, here's my position. My position is right. You were wrong. I grew up in a household of right and wrong. Being wrong was horrible. It was just really the worst thing that could happen to you, is be called out for being wrong about something. And what I've come to see is that the universe is just infinite potential.
Yes.
And when I come at my activism from that place, I have a stance about abortion. I don't think anyone wants to have one, but whether you have the choice to have one is something different. And life is important after you're born, so the thousands of children who live in foster care and need a family to adopt them, let's, if you're really pro-life, let's take care of those children, et cetera. And so it really has come to really just gelled for me that spiritual activism is being active from that place of infinite potential, that there are many, many, many answers. And who am I to know which one is right or wrong, or even if that's a concept that needs to be addressed.
When you were speaking about your joy earlier, I had this image. So I'm on flights a lot. And when you're like at 30,000 feet, you have clouds below you, and sometimes it's all stormy and thundery with the sky on the top. And I feel a bit like that with activism, that sometimes I'm super fascinated by all the clouds. Look what's going to happen, what if, I don't know why they didn't do this sooner. I mean, even if I start now, and I'm super fascinated by that. And I do have a capacity to act out of that. you know, to try and scrape for a solution within that. And then sometimes I just look up and it's magnificent. And there's all the sky and potential and possibility, right? And I have potential to act from that, right? And I feel like it has been a kind of constant reminder that I'm fully capable of getting very caught up, but I'm also fully capable of taking action from another source, right? Using this as my like horsepower versus trying to see that, oh, there's more available and I could act from there. I mean, for me, that has been just, I think, a continuing discovery. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more. We're almost at the end. 1 minute.
One of the dilemmas I've been having was touched upon by the oxymoron. A phrase I heard recently said something like, don't let the allure of the distant and the dramatic or grandiose distract you from the local and the simple. And, you know, with these possibilities of global impact and so forth, how do you balance that with, you know, starting with yourself? It's kind of a dilemma.
Well, there is no balance if you're starting with yourself. Start with yourself. And the rest will follow.
Sid always said that. He said, get selfish. Take care of yourself. Because then you have the overflowing cup. To quote myself, but it wasn't really me.
What did that mean again? Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so for those of you who are interested, one of the things that the conference organizers wanted to do was have a little bit of follow-up. So they're offering, I believe, complimentary follow-up webinars. And so my thought for this track was to start with the first 2. They were thinking of 3, but I'm not sure how many people would actually sign on. So we'll send out an invitation, and we'll see with the first one. If no one shows up, then we won't do the second. But we're going to plan out 2. And then after the second one, if there are enough people to do a third, we'll do a third. So how many people would be interested in a follow-up webinar, like on someone said maybe Friday at noon or something? Okay. So we'll offer, and you'll get an email about that with a link, a Zoom link. It should be very easy if you know how to do Zoom already, but Zoom it's just clicking on a link, and if you've got a little camera on your computer and a microphone, you're good to go. Okay.
That might be a good place to put out, like if people are wondering, how can I get involved in X, Y, or Z? Because I think we know of some ways, or people could suggest action. Yeah?
Or positive groups that we know of that people might enjoy.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us on this track, and I've found it really fascinating, and you know, I've really enjoyed listening to everyone speak, including you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.